When someone mentions the word trust, you normally think of honesty, integrity, and confidence. But in the financial and legal world, when someone mentions trust, many quickly become confused and even a little frustrated. Well, in the few short minutes, I'll clear up the mystery and make the concept of a trust simple and understandable. A trust is a legal document established within current law to help you control the things that you own while alive and direct them upon your death. Significant legal considerations and contingencies exist when creating a trust and other estate planning documents, so it pays to seek the legal advice of those that are able to create these documents in the first place. You might be thinking that you have a will and that document distributes your assets at death. And that would be true, but real and often compelling differences exist between a will and a trust. So let's begin. In your mind's eye, take out a large keepsake box, put it right down on the kitchen table, and I want you to open it up, wherever it is that you're watching this video. A trust is like that keepsake box. You can put items in that box, and you can take items out. You can put in a checkbook, a deed to a property, car keys, and stock certificates, and you can take them out. And just like the outside of a Campbell's soup can, where you'll see the recipes and ingredients, the keepsake box has a set of instructions, recipes, and ingredients directing the use of and the transfer of money. Whatever the grantor puts inside of that box and whatever the grantor directs, then the transfer of those assets will flow accordingly. Normally, you're the grantor. So while alive, the grantor can put in and take out whatever he or she wants to. But at the grantor's incapacity, whether it's due to death or illness, the box is then shut closed and it's locked. And only the assets that are inside of the box are governed by the instructions that are on the outside of the box. The recipe and ingredients on the outside give the instructions to the successor trustee as to handle the assets that are on the inside of the box. Keep in mind that each person can have more than one box with completely different instructions on each. The grantor can seemingly create an unlimited number of provisions and directions for the trust. Generally, the grantor directs under certain circumstances who's going to get the money and when. The trust, therefore, flows the money to those who will inherit it. The law provides for many different types of trusts. There are charitable trusts, special needs trusts, revocable trusts, living trusts, just to name a few. Remember, the lawyer creates the trust. It's your job, with the help of your financial advisor, to define your objectives, your goals, and your dreams for your money, and then move that money into the trust. Because you can have more than one trust, you'll need to identify which trust is to control and distribute that particular asset. So let's start clearing up some of this confusion with some basic definitions. The grantor is the person who puts the assets in the trust. Normally, while you are alive, you are the grantor and you have the trust titled in your name. The trustee is the person or department, such as the bank, that ends up managing the assets that are inside the trust within the guidelines of the trust itself. There will be a personal representative or executrix for the will, but the trust has a trustee. Normally, with revocable living trusts, the grantor and the trustee start out being the same person. Titling. Most trusts are titled like this: the Shack Hill Trust, Shack Hill Trustee, UA, March 17th, 2017. And the UA stands for under agreement. Note, you will see a variation on how accounts are titled. The name has no material meaning, but generally kind of gives a clue as to what the purpose of the trust is in the first place. For example, the title might be the Shack Hill Revocable Living Trust or the Hill Family Trust. If it was the Hill Children's Education Trust, then you would have a clue that the money would be used for the Hill Children's Education. It doesn't have to give a clue. It could be called Trust Number 1. Essentially, you choose the name within certain common standards. No one universal way dictates how the trust should be titled. Successor trustee. This is the person or entity, like a bank or trust department, who will succeed the original trustee when the original trustee either resigns or is unable to serve. Co-trustees and co-successor trustees. The grantor can name co-trustees and co-successor trustees to serve. The grantor needs to be certain whether the intent is for them to work together or if they can work independently. Be careful. This arrangement might seem to be fair or the right thing to do, but it can become very burdensome, particularly if the co lives out of the area and they're required to work together. If this was the case, then there would be a need for both signatures on every transaction. This would mean overnight mail, lost mail, coordinating between work schedules, vacation, and illnesses. I have found that co-trustees might sound like a great idea, but in practice, it might not be. More consternation and frustration is created under this agreement. If you're concerned about one of your children taking advantage or having certain favoritism over another, then you might want to give strong consideration to naming an independent trust department where they will be operating without prejudice. Name them as your successor trustee. The last definition is the beneficiary. The beneficiary is the person, people, or organization who will receive your assets. Now that we've talked about some of what a trusts are and given some definition, let's spend some time talking about their purpose. And through this discussion, you'll begin to see if you need a trust based on your unique situation. Remember, not everybody needs a trust. Some women with modest means absolutely need a trust, and some with significant assets might not need one at all. The number one purpose of a trust is to flow your money. The trust lets you stagger money over time or give it out all at once. It lets you set thresholds of achievement, either naturally at certain ages or at certain accomplishments. You can put parameters on the distribution or the flow of the money to your beneficiaries based on whether certain deeds are done or whether certain deeds are not done. You can't do that with a will. Let me give you some examples, but know that the list is truly unlimited. Once they've turned 21, then they get X amount. At the age of 30, they get Y amount. After they've graduated from college. Once they're married. After the birth of their first child. When they've achieved a graduate degree. If they're not in jail. If they're not dependent on an illegal substance. As long as there's no criminal record. If they join the military. If they receive an honorable discharge. You have nearly complete control as to when, how, and under what conditions you flow the money. You can set benchmarks for described achievements to transition the money over time, or you can do it just based on age. You can restrict the flow if there's a history of irresponsible behavior or criminal activity. By delaying ownership of the assets when using the trust, you could allow the beneficiaries time to mature and become more responsible as they accomplish certain tasks and achieve certain ages. Additionally, if there's special needs considerations, you can schedule the income stream and not let that child have access to the principal. You can start an income stream, change it to a lump sum, and then return it back to an income stream. Only your imagination limits you to the possibilities of when the money comes out of the trust. You are in control with the use of a trust on how you will flow the money and when. If you restrict the flow of money, you cannot do that with great detail under a will, so a trust is best. Barbara's net worth is $1,350,000 when you include her home. She has 2 sons. One is responsible. He's married and has Barbara's only 3 grandchildren. And the other son has never been married and has been in jail for minor offenses twice. Barbara wants the first son to have his portion of the inheritance at once and in full without restriction at her death. She wants the second son to clean up his act, then get his money only after he graduates from college, holds a white-collar job for over a year, and stays drug-free for 5 years. At each of these 3 events, she has directed the successor trustee to release money to him. Well, Barbara needs a trust because she wants to flow the money under certain circumstances to her second son. She can name the responsible son to be the successor trustee or her bank, or anyone else she chooses. But a will alone does not work well. The second important benefit of a trust is to avoid probate. Your retirement account, like your IRA or 401k plan, and your life insurance, for example, all have named beneficiaries. As such, they avoid probate. But your single account, your paintings on the wall, your silver tea set, and your stamp collection don't have beneficiaries. If you will these assets to your heirs, then they will have to go through the probate process. If you use a trust, then probate can be avoided. As we all know that probate can be costly and will delay the transfer of your assets to those who will eventually end up with them, you might want to use a trust. By using a trust or that keepsake box, you create a legal document and outline your wishes as to how you want your money to flow. Assets titled into the trust bypass the probate process and go directly to the named beneficiary as outlined in the trust. Because probate is generally the last resort, if you do almost anything, your plan can prevent your estate from having to deal with the probate process. The third benefit comes if your estate is challenged. The instructions and wishes on your keepsake box are often viewed to be harder to challenge than those of a will. For example, if a will was created very near death, then there may very well be a challenge as to whether it was properly executed, whether the writer was of sound mind, or if there was some undue pressure or coercion of any kind. In contrast, if the trust has been in place over the last 6 months or 6 years and has been operating normally, the trust is generally deemed to be more of a truer representation of the wishes of the deceased. But don't be fooled here. I've spoken with many attorneys who repeatedly tell me that they will make a good living based on lawsuits that arise using trusts. Just because you have a trust doesn't mean there won't be a challenge. It just means that the court won't have to probate the assets, which has absolutely nothing to do with whether there's a challenge or not. The fourth reason for a trust is privacy. The will is a public document for all to see. The trust is not. Well, many say that that's a good thing. After all, why is it other people's business to know what your assets are and how they're going to transition? On the other hand, because there is little oversight with the trust, no one is watching the successor trustee to ensure the wishes are being carried out as desired, then there can be a concern. Unfortunately, the successor trustee may not always act in the best interest of the deceased, but in his own best interest. So there are always pros and cons to everything. Privacy can also be a detriment if the grantor of the trust becomes incapacitated and the successor trustee has a vested interest in the remaining assets at the grantor's death. Well, let me give you an example of this. Let's say that you've created a trust, a keepsake box, and you've named one of your two daughters to be the successor trustee, and you become ill and unable to handle the trust. Your daughter now becomes the successor trustee, looking at the ingredients on the outside of the keepsake box, and she will make the financial decisions for this money and for your care. Well, if she's the beneficiary as well, then there's going to be a conflict of interest. Does she spend top dollar on your care and risk depleting the funds that she would otherwise receive at your death? Your daughter might think, well, Mom's going to die soon anyways, and besides, she doesn't even recognize me. Well, because the other daughter is a beneficiary, that other daughter does have the right to know what's going on, but the court and other family members and the general public will not. I've seen firsthand when quality care was restricted so that more money would be left inside of the trust in the first place for the benefit of the beneficiary. This is a sad and unfortunate possibility. The fifth reason for a trust is to take advantage of the applicable exclusion credit that's allowable under federal law. This is the amount of money that you can shelter upon your death, free from estate tax or the death tax. The part of your estate above this amount will have an ordinary tax consequence. So federal law has continued to change the amount of this exclusion, and keeping up with all of these changes can be daunting. The amount excluded used to be fairly low, but with new laws, the amount that you can transfer without a death tax is over $5 million. So if you fall into this category, make sure you have an estate planning attorney on your professional management team to ensure that you take advantage of important inheritance tax avoidance laws. The sixth reason to have a trust is to protect you and your assets if you are alive, but incapacitated or unable to take care of your own financial affairs. This trust establishes a clear path of authority if you are alive, but unable to manage your money. Additionally, there may be a time in your life that you just don't want to manage your money. The trust provisions allow the trustee, which is generally you, to give authority to the successor trustee whenever you want. Without the trust, caring for someone's assets while they are alive but incapacitated can become very burdensome and expensive. Holly and her husband accumulated several investment properties that created a nice income for them during retirement. In addition, there was a sizable brokerage account, a vacation home, and other assets that needed to be tended to. Together, they met with an attorney and created a trust. After her husband died, Holly managed the trust and all of the assets for a couple of years. But she really didn't want to do that any longer. So she resigned as trustee in favor of the successor trustee, which was the bank trust department. She knows that the bank will manage the assets that she no longer wants to, and that they will keep sending her a monthly check, so she can travel and visit the grandkids without worrying about a thing. She also knows that if she develops Alzheimer's or any other kind of disease, then there won't be any disruption to her assets or that monthly check. She knows that at her death, the banker will follow her instructions impartially and distribute her assets according to what she and her husband wanted. So if you've decided that you want all of your assets to be distributed by a trust, well, then you're going to want to have a pour-over will. At your death, each item that you own will transfer by operation of law or will be added to your estate and then be probated. Make sure you review the bonus track, How Assets Transition to Heirs, for a greater explanation. When all of your assets are accounted for, those assets governed by your estate, and hence your will, should be poured over into the trust or the keepsake box after the probate process concludes. By having a pour-over provision, you are ensuring any assets not specifically titled into the trust in the first place will still be distributed as if they were titled into the trust all along. Mildred loved both children equally. She had created a trust that gives all of her assets equally to her children with certain restrictions. To make sure she didn't miss anything, she created a pour-over will to redirect all of her assets to her trust. This way, if there was an account out there that she forgot about, or if she had assets that were unable to be titled, like jewelry or art, then they would be governed by the trust and flowed to her children because the will and the estate was poured over into it. In the past, many of my clients used to think that just because they had a trust means that they would avoid paying taxes. Not true. Remember, income tax is never forgiven. So even if your estate is below the estate tax threshold, money that is income, such as retirement accounts and gains and annuities, will always incur an income tax. Also, those who have wealth in excess of the applicable exclusion threshold, they'll still need to pay applicable death taxes. Consider Bill Gates. Just because he's created trusts, which I can only presume he has, he doesn't skip paying taxes. The trust will flow the money, which is the number one reason for having the trust in the first place, but they don't avoid taxes after the exclusion amount has been used. Trust can also be used in advanced estate planning. There are a number of trusts available designed to shelter assets from current law. Trusts can generate income for you while alive, and then the remaining principal can go to charity at your death. Other trusts transition your residence to your heirs while you are alive in a very tax-efficient manner. And still others will transition your assets to your husband or your wife if he or she is not a United States citizen. And then still others can be used for special needs children. Please consult a well-qualified attorney to discuss these important strategies. Once the trust documents have been signed and properly executed, there is still one more vital step remaining. You must, and I emphasize the word must, you must follow the instructions and retitle all of your assets into the trust. This will likely include a trip to the bank to change the account name from your single or joint account into the name of the trust. Same with your brokerage account and any other asset that you and your lawyer want governed by the trust, like your car, home, vacation home, your yacht, and other assets. Once you've retitled all of the appropriate assets into the trust, you're finished. But if you skip this part, if you delay or just don't do it, your plan will not work. The best way to illustrate this is to walk you through an actual case that I worked on many years ago. In 1995, Bob and Robin established trusts and instructions as to what should happen when the first one of them should die. Both had been married before, and both of their spouses had passed away, leaving them each with 2 children. When they were married at age 47 and 45, they knew that they were not going to have any children together, but they wanted to care for each other while alive and then leave their part of the estate to their respected children. Robin and Bob were married for 25 years when Bob passed away in 2001. Well, I met Robin in 2005, and all of her assets were in her single name. Nothing was titled into the trust. To that point in her life, Robin had not funded the plan that they together had worked on and that their professionals had set up for them. Basically, she had a beautiful keepsake box, but it was empty. The concept of funding the estate trust seems to be missed by so many. So I've come up with a simple yet powerful analogy. I tell those that the lawyer builds the house and it's your job to move in the furniture. If the furniture is not in the house, it'll not be controlled by the house or protected by it. Therefore, if the bank account is not titled into the trust, it will not be governed by the trust document. Because Robin had not followed the plan and all of the assets remained titled in her single name, her estate would have passed via the will and probate. Even though she had a well thought out plan with top quality trust documents, because everything was titled in her own single name, those documents would have been useless. Her will directed all of her assets to be split evenly between her 2 children, not Bob's. As the combined estate was worth over $3 million, her 2 children would have inherited everything, leaving Bob's children with nothing. Most likely, Bob's children would file a lawsuit against her children for their part of their family's estate, but they would lose. So Robin showed me the estate planning documents. They directed that at the death of the first one, 3 trusts should be created. The estate would be valued and then divided in half. Because Bob died first, the first trust was to receive his applicable exclusion amount for the year 2001. The second trust would receive whatever his half of the estate was, minus what went in the first trust. And then Robin was directed to place her entire half of her estate into a third trust. By actually funding the estate, by moving in the furniture the way that they had directed, we were able to avert a disaster and create the income that Robin needed while she was still alive, preventing that lawsuit that was sure to come. Well, Robin has moved to Florida, so I've encouraged her to establish domicile there. I've also advised her to restate her legal documents as a legal resident of the state of Florida. Quite a mess averted. Just because you've taken the time and the expense to set up a trust doesn't mean that you're finished. You need to fund those assets into the trust that you want governed by the trust. Like I said earlier, the best analogy is a simple one. The attorney builds a house and you move in the furniture. As a side note, check with your attorney as to the wisdom of titling your personal residence into the trust. Some states, such as Florida, give strong protection to the homeowner and generally does not give protection to a home that's titled in a trust. You see, Florida gives protection to individuals, not to trusts. In Virginia, where I live, the protection is not strong at all. All a trust is a powerful legal document that can greatly aid in your legacy, both while alive and at your death. Pull out your keepsake box and make your legacy come true.